Hi, this is Blake.
Hi, this is Cameron. We welcome you to yet another episode of Trust Talks. Okay, so, we've been talking a lot lately about cybersecurity, and I know it's a big concern for a lot of our listeners.
Yeah, it is. And I know a lot of folks were really trying to get their heads around this whole zero trust thing.
Yeah, and I know you sent over that article, Zero Trust Architecture Engineering, a Security Model for the Modern Enterprise.
Right. Yeah,
That's a pretty dense article. I mean, there's a lot to unpack there.
it is. It is a very comprehensive look at it.
So what we thought we'd do today is sort of take a deep dive into that and really try to pull out what's most important for our listeners.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I think it's a really critical conversation to be having right now
For sure.
because the old way of securing our networks,
Mm-hmm.
just building this big, strong perimeter around everything.
The fortress.
Exactly, the fortress mentality.
Yeah.
That's just not cutting it anymore.
No, it doesn't seem to be working too well.
Like, think about it. We hear about it all the time in the news. Ransomware attacks are just becoming so sophisticated.
Every day. Yeah.
And then you've got the threats that come from inside, people within organizations.
Right.
And then the software supply chains.
Mm.
Those are being exploited, for vulnerabilities.
So the bad guys are already inside the fortress, it sounds like.
Yeah, that's a great analogy.
Yeah,
Right? They're already inside. So what's the point of the big, strong walls?
exactly. So that's where this zero trust architecture, or ZTA as they call it in the article,
Yeah, you'll hear it called both.
offers a really different way of thinking about security.
Right. It completely flips the script.
Yeah, it does.
And it basically starts by assuming that, a breach is inevitable or maybe even already happening.
Right. So it kind of throws out that old model of, let's try to keep the bad guys out.
Absolutely.
So it's more about how do we manage it when they're already there.
Exactly. How do we contain it?
Yeah.
How do we limit the damage?
Yeah.
That's what zero trust is all about. It focuses on continuous verification. So you're always checking. You're
Yeah.
always verifying.
Got it.
You're never trusting. You're always verifying.
Right, right.
So it's a big mindset shift for a lot of organizations.
It is. It's a huge shift. Okay, so in this deep dive, what we really want to do is go beyond just, defining zero trust.
Yep.
But really give our listeners a clear understanding of, how does it actually work? Like, what's the thinking behind it?
Absolutely.
What are the essential pieces that make it function?
Yeah.
And, what are some of the practical steps that organizations are taking to actually adopt this new security model?
Right.
So let's dive right in. And I think, one of the first things that really stood out to me in this article is this idea of a real fundamental shift in philosophy when it comes to security.
Yeah.
It's moving away from this concept of, trusting anything that's inside the network to a much more granular and context-aware approach.
That's a great way to put it. Yeah. It's all about getting specific.
Yeah, exactly. It's
Yeah.
not just about, are you on the network? Are you off the network? It's about who are you?
Right. Exactly.
What device are you using? What are you trying to access?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So what they do is they lay out 3 core principles
Okay.
that really drive this shift. And I think these are really important to understand.
Okay, let's go through this.
Yeah. The first one is verify explicitly.
Okay, verify explicitly.
Now, that sounds pretty straightforward,
Yeah, it does.
but it actually represents a pretty big departure from how we've traditionally done things.
Okay, in what way?
Well, it means you can no longer just grant access to someone or something just because they happen to be connected to your internal network.
Right, so it's not enough to just be, plugged into the network or connected to the Wi-Fi or something like that.
Exactly. Every user, every device, every application, workload, whatever it is,
Got it.
trying to access a resource, it needs to be authenticated and validated
Every time.
every single time.
Okay, so it's kind of like, showing your ID every time you walk through a door in a building.
Exactly. It doesn't matter if you work there. It doesn't matter if you've been there 100 times before.
Mhm.
Every time you walk through that door, you got to show your ID.
Got it. Okay, so that's verify explicitly, principle number 1.
Right. The second one is least privilege access.
Okay, least privilege. I feel like we hear that a lot in security these days.
You do. You hear it a lot. And, it's one of those terms that gets thrown around.
Yeah.
But with zero trust, it's really a central tenet.
Okay, so it's not just like a nice to have, it's really like the foundation.
It is. It's foundational.
Okay, so what does that mean in a practical sense? Like, what does least privilege actually mean?
It means you severely limit access to only what is absolutely necessary for someone or something to do their job.
Okay, so if you've got a contractor working on your house, you only give them the key to the room they're working on.
That's a great analogy, right? You don't give them a key to the whole house.
Right, you don't want them wandering around.
Exactly. And that's the same idea here with least privilege. You're limiting the potential for damage if an account gets compromised or if a system gets hacked into.
Makes sense. So that's principle number 2, least privilege access.
Okay, so the third core principle is assume breach.
Assume breach. Okay, that's an interesting one.
And this one I think is probably the biggest mindset shift.
Okay, I can see why, because it's kind of saying, we're not even going to try to prevent every attack. We're going to assume they're already in.
Exactly. It's
Yeah.
a fundamentally different way of thinking about security.
So if we assume they're already in, how does that change our strategy?
Well, instead of focusing all your energy on just keeping people out, you start thinking about, okay,
Okay.
what happens if they do get in? What do we do?
So you're sort of planning for the worst case scenario.
Exactly. You're always thinking worst case scenario.
Right.
So you're prioritizing continuous monitoring. You're looking for suspicious activity.
Okay.
You're using network segmentation to contain any potential breaches.
Okay.
And you're implementing real-time access controls to make it much harder for attackers to move around and cause widespread damage.
So that's where the microsegmentation comes in.
Exactly. So you're breaking your network up into these smaller compartments.
Mm-hmm.
So even if one part gets compromised,
It doesn't take down the whole thing.
exactly, you're limiting the blast radius.
Yeah, like a series of bulkheads on a ship.
That's a great analogy. Yeah.
So if one compartment gets flooded, it doesn't sink the whole ship.
Exactly.
Okay, so that's principle number 3, assume breach.
Right. So to sum up these core ideas, Zero Trust basically throws out this whole concept of automatic trust.
Okay.
It's all about ongoing dynamic verification for every single interaction that happens within an organization's digital environment.
Right, so it's constantly checking and rechecking and verifying who you are, what you're doing, where you're coming from.
Exactly. And that makes it a much more proactive and resilient security posture.
Got it.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's the why of Zero Trust.
Mhm.
Why it's important, why we need to shift to this new model.
Right.
But the article also gets into how the practical aspects of actually building a Zero Trust framework.
Right. So let's get into the architectural component.
Yeah, let's talk about the nuts and bolts.
Yeah. So the first critical pillar they talk about is identity and access management, or IAM.
Okay, I am.
Now, this is really at the heart of the whole Zero Trust concept.
And this makes sense because if it's all about verifying who you are and what you're allowed to do, then IAM is how you do that.
Exactly. Zero Trust fundamentally revolves around verifying and continuously validating the identity of users, devices, and applications.
Right, so this is like the foundation of the whole thing.
It is. It's the foundation.
Okay, so let's talk about some of the technologies that make up IAM and, what are some of the key features that we need to be thinking about?
So one that you hear a lot about is multi-factor authentication, or MFA.
Right, MFA.
And this is really crucial because it adds that extra layer of security beyond just your username and password.
Yeah, it's that, something, you have something, you are.
Exactly. So it could be a code from an app on your phone. It could be a physical token.
A fingerprint scan.
Yeah, a fingerprint scan, or even something like facial recognition.
Right.
The idea is that even if someone manages to get a hold of your password,
Okay.
they still can't get in because they need that second factor.
Right, they need that other piece of the puzzle.
Exactly. And then there's single sign-on, or SSO.
Right, that's SSO.
Now, this is primarily about convenience. It lets users log in once and access multiple applications without having to enter their credentials over and over again.
Right, which is great for users.
It simplifies things, but it also enhances security.
In what way?
Well, because it centralizes identity management. So you've got one place where you're managing all your user accounts,
Okay.
and you can enforce stricter security policies across the board.
So it's not just about convenience, it's also about better security.
Exactly.
Okay, got it.
And then there's something called risk-based conditional access.
Okay, risk-based conditional access, that sounds kind of complicated.
It's actually not that complicated.
Okay.
The idea is that instead of just having a fixed set of rules about who can access what,
Okay.
the system actually looks at a bunch of different factors.
Okay, like what kind of factors?
Well, they mentioned a few things in the article.
Right.
Where's the user logging in from? Is it a normal location for them, or is it somewhere unusual?
So if I suddenly try to log into my bank account from, Russia.
Exactly. That might raise a red flag.
Yeah, that would be a bit suspicious.
Yeah. Another factor is the security posture of the device they're using.
Okay.
So is the operating system up to date? Are they running antivirus software?
So, if my computer's riddled with malware, that might not be a good sign.
Exactly. And then they also look at the user's behavior.
Okay.
Are they doing things that are typical for them, or are they suddenly accessing things they've never accessed before?
So like if I suddenly start downloading, gigabytes of data that I've never touched before.
Right, that would be a red flag.
Yeah, yeah.
So the system takes all these different factors into account,
Okay.
and then it decides whether to grant access or not,
Yeah.
or maybe it'll ask for additional verification.
So it's kind of like a dynamic risk assessment happening in real time.
Exactly. It's all about assessing the risk and adapting the security controls accordingly.
Okay, so that's risk-based conditional access.
Right. And the article gives a really good example.
Okay.
They talk about a situation where someone tries to log in from an unfamiliar device in a high-risk country.
Okay.
Now, even if they have the right username and password,
Okay.
the system might still block them because it's recognizing that there's a higher risk.
Right, because all those other factors are saying this is suspicious.
Exactly.
Okay, so that's a good example of how risk-based conditional access works.
Yeah, and it's a much more nuanced and effective way of controlling access
Yeah.
than just relying on credentials alone.
Okay, so we've talked about MFA, we've talked about SSO, we've talked about risk-based conditional access.
Right.
What other key components of IAM are important for zero trust?
Well, another one is something called identity federation.
Okay, identity federation, what's that?
So this is basically a way for different organizations to share identity information.
Okay,
So, for example, if you have a partnership with another company,
right.
you might want to allow their employees to access certain resources on your network, but you don't necessarily want to create separate accounts for them.
Right, that would be a nightmare to manage.
It would be a nightmare. So with identity federation, you could essentially trust the other organization to authenticate their own users,
Okay.
and then you just grant them access based on their existing credentials.
So it's kind of like a single sign-on, but between different organizations.
Exactly. It's kind of like extending that SSO concept to a broader ecosystem.
Got it. Okay, so that's identity federation.
Right. And then there's also something called privileged access management, or PAM.
Okay, privileged access management.
Now, this
Yeah.
is specifically for controlling access to highly sensitive systems and data.
So we're talking about the crown jewels here, the really important stuff.
Exactly. The things that you absolutely don't want to get into the wrong hands.
Right.
So PAM implements a lot of extra security controls around these privileged accounts.
Okay, like what kind of controls?
Well, things like requiring multi-factor authentication for every login session,
Yeah.
recording all activity so you have a complete audit trail,
Got it.
and even implementing something called just-in-time access.
Just-in-time access. Okay, what's that?
So this means that privileged users only get access to the systems they need for the specific task they're working on.
Okay.
And once they're finished, their access is revoked.
So it's kind of like minimizing the window of opportunity for an attacker?
Exactly. You're reducing the attack surface by only granting access when it's absolutely necessary.
Got it.
Yeah.
Okay, so those are some of the key components of IAM that are really important for zero trust.
Right.
Okay, so let's move on to the next architectural component that the article discusses, which is microsegmentation and software-defined perimeters, or SDP.
Yeah, this one's all about controlling network access and limiting the spread of an attack.
Right. So we talked a little bit about microsegmentation earlier.
Right.
But let's dive into that a bit more. So traditional network segmentation, that's kind of the old way of doing things.
Yeah, and it's still important,
Okay.
but it's more about dividing your network into these bigger zones.
Okay, by department or by function.
Exactly. So you might have a zone for your finance department, a zone for your HR department, and so on.
Got it.
But zero trust takes a much more granular approach.
Okay, so instead of these big zones, it's more like tiny little compartments.
Exactly. That's what microsegmentation is all about.
Okay, so instead of, locking down the whole building, you're locking down individual rooms.
Exactly. You're putting locks on every door.
Okay.
And that way, even if someone gets into one room,
Right.
they can't easily get into other rooms.
Got it.
And that's where software-defined perimeters come in.
Okay. Software-defined perimeters, or SDP.
Yeah. So these essentially create these dynamic on-demand connections between a user and the specific application they need to access
Okay.
without exposing the entire underlying network.
So it's kind of like creating a secret tunnel between the user and the application?
Exactly. It's like a private pathway.
Okay.
And that way, even if an attacker gets onto the network, they can't see these connections.
They're invisible. Exactly. They're invisible. And they can't access the applications that are protected by SDP.
So it's kind of like a stealth mode for your applications.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it.
Okay, so that's microsegmentation and SDP.
And then the article also talks about workload segmentation, which is really important as well.
Okay, workload segmentation, what's that about?
So this is about preventing an attacker who's gained access to one system from easily moving laterally to other critical systems.
All right, so it's about containing the damage.
Exactly. It's like building firewalls between different parts of your infrastructure.
Okay.
So, for example, if you're using a cloud platform like AWS or Azure, you can use workload segmentation to isolate different applications or services.
Okay.
So even if one application gets compromised, the others are still protected.
So it's kind of like creating separate blast zones within your cloud environment.
Exactly. That's a great analogy.
Okay, so that's workload segmentation.
Right. And the article gives a really good example of this in action.
They talk about a developer who's working on a project that involves multiple containers in a Kubernetes cluster.
Okay.
Now, with workload segmentation, the developer is only allowed to access the specific containers that are necessary for their work.
Right.
They can't just access any container they want.
So they're limited to just what they need.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that way, even if their account gets compromised or if one of the containers is vulnerable,
Right.
the attacker can't easily move to other parts of the cluster.
Got it.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's a good example of how workload segmentation can help to contain a breach.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've talked about microsegmentation, SDP, and workload segmentation.
Right.
What other techniques are important for controlling network access in a zero-trust environment?
Well, another one that they mention is network traffic analysis, or NTA.
Okay, network traffic analysis. What's that?
So this is basically about monitoring the traffic that's flowing through your network
Okay.
and looking for any anomalies that might indicate suspicious activity.
So it's kind of like looking for patterns that are out of the ordinary.
Exactly. And there are a lot of different tools and techniques that can be used for NTA.
Okay.
Some of them are signature-based, so they're looking for known attack patterns.
Okay.
Others are behavior-based, so they're looking for deviations from normal network activity.
Got it. So it's kind of like having a security camera that's watching all the traffic on your network.
Yeah, that's a good analogy.
And it's looking for anything that looks suspicious.
Exactly. And then if it sees something suspicious, it can alert the security team.
So they can investigate further.
Exactly.
Okay, so that's network traffic analysis.
Right. And then another important technique is network access control, or NAC.
Okay, network access control.
Yeah. So this is basically a way to enforce security policies on devices that are trying to connect to your network.
Okay, so it's kind of like a bouncer at a club.
Exactly. It's checking everyone's ID at the door,
Okay.
and it's making sure that they meet certain criteria before they're allowed in.
Okay, like what kind of criteria?
Well, it could be things like having the latest security patches installed, or having up-to-date antivirus software,
Got it.
or even just being a known and trusted device.
Right, so if my computer's not up to snuff, it's not getting into the club.
Exactly. And NAC can be implemented in a variety of ways.
Okay.
You can use dedicated NAC appliances. You can use software agents that are installed on the devices themselves.
Got it.
Or you can even integrate NAC functionality into your existing network infrastructure.
So there are a lot of different options available.
Yeah, there are a lot of different ways to do it.
Okay, so those are some of the key techniques that are used for controlling network access in a zero-trust environment.
Right. It's all about being very granular and very specific about who and what is allowed to access your network.
Okay, so let's move on to the third key architectural component, which is device security and endpoint compliance.
Okay, so now we're shifting our focus from the network to the individual devices that are connecting to it.
Right, so we've talked about securing the network itself.
Right.
But now we need to talk about securing the endpoints.
Exactly. And this is where zero trust really extends its never trust, always verify principle.
Okay, so it's not enough to just verify the user's identity.
No,
You also have to verify the device itself
exactly. You have to make sure that the device is trustworthy.
before you allow it to access any resources.
Exactly. So this involves implementing a bunch of different security controls on the endpoints.
Okay, like what kind of controls?
Well, one of the most important is endpoint security software.
Right, so we're talking about things like antivirus, anti-malware.
Exactly. And also things like intrusion detection and prevention systems,
Okay,
data loss prevention software,
got it.
and even things like disk encryption.
Right, so all these things are designed to protect the device itself from attacks.
Exactly. And to protect the data that's stored on the device.
Got it. Okay, what else?
Well, another important control is device hardening.
Okay, device hardening. What's that?
So this is basically about configuring the device in a way that makes it more secure.
Okay, so it's kind of like locking down all the settings.
Exactly. So you might disable unnecessary services.
Okay.
You might configure strong password policies.
Got it.
You might restrict user privileges.
Right, so it's all about making the device itself as secure as possible.
Exactly. And then there's something called device attestation.
Okay,
Yeah.
device attestation. What's that?
So this is a way to verify the identity and integrity of the device itself.
Okay, so it's kind of like proving that the device is who it says it is.
Exactly.
Oh, yeah.
And that it hasn't been tampered with.
Got it.
So device attestation can involve a variety of techniques.
Okay.
It could be something as simple as checking the device's serial number or MAC address,
Okay.
or it could be something more sophisticated like using cryptographic signatures.
Got it. So it's all about making sure that the device is legitimate and trustworthy.
Exactly.
Okay, and then there's endpoint detection and response, or EDR.
Yeah, this is a big one.
Okay, so EDR is basically a security system that's specifically designed to protect endpoints.
Exactly. It's like having a security guard stationed on every device, watching for any suspicious activity.
So it's constantly monitoring the device, looking for anything that looks like a threat.
Exactly. And EDR systems are typically very sophisticated.
Okay.
They use a variety of techniques to detect threats,
Okay.
including signature-based detection,
Okay.
behavior-based detection,
Got it.
and even machine learning.
Right. So they're using all the latest and greatest technologies to catch the bad guys.
Exactly. And if they do detect a threat,
Okay.
they can take a variety of actions.
Okay. Like what?
Well, they can alert the security team.
Okay.
They can quarantine the infected device.
Got it.
They can even automatically remediate the threat.
So they can actually clean up the mess.
Exactly. They can try to fix the problem without any human intervention.
Okay, so EDR is a really important part of endpoint security.
It's becoming essential in today's threat landscape.
Okay, and then there's Zero Trust Network Access, or ZTNA.
Yeah, this is another big one.
Okay, so ZTNA is basically a new way of providing remote access to corporate resources.
Yeah, exactly. It's a more secure and flexible alternative to traditional VPNs.
Okay, so how is it different from a VPN?
Well, with a traditional VPN, when you connect, you typically get access to the entire network.
Right, so it's kind of like a big open door.
Exactly. You're essentially inside the fortress.
Right.
But with ZTNA, you only get access to the specific applications and resources that you need.
Okay, so it's a much more granular level of access.
Exactly. And that's much more secure because even if your device is compromised,
Right.
the attacker can't access everything on the network.
They're limited to just the resources that you've been granted access to.
Exactly. And ZTNA is also often more user-friendly than traditional VPNs.
Okay, in what way?
Well, for one thing, it's typically faster
Okay.
because you're not routing all your traffic through a central VPN server,
Right.
and it's also more reliable
Okay.
because it's less susceptible to outages.
So it's faster, it's more reliable, and it's more secure.
Exactly. It's kind of a win-win-win situation.
Okay, so ZTNA is a really important part of endpoint security.
It is, and it's becoming increasingly popular as organizations move to a zero-trust model.
Got it. Okay, so we've covered endpoint security, software device, hardening device, attestation, EDR, and ZTNA.
Right.
Those are all really important controls for securing the endpoints.
Exactly. And they all play a key role in a zero-trust architecture.
Okay, so let's move on to the fourth and final key architectural component, which is real-time monitoring and adaptive security.
Yeah, this is where all the pieces come together.
Right, this is where we start to see how zero trust really works in practice.
Exactly. So, as we've been discussing, traditional security often relies on static policies.
Okay.
You configure the rules and then you kind of hope for the best.
Right.
But zero trust is much more dynamic.
Okay.
It's constantly monitoring the environment,
Right.
analyzing data,
Okay.
and adapting the security controls in real time.
So it's constantly learning and evolving.
Exactly. It's like having a security system that's always getting smarter.
Okay, so let's talk about some of the technologies that make this possible.
Well, one of the most important is Security Information and Event Management, or SIEM.
Okay, SIEM.
Yeah, so SIEM systems are basically like central clearinghouses for security data.
Okay.
They collect logs and events from all sorts of different sources.
Okay, like what kind of sources?
Well, it could be firewalls, intrusion detection systems, antivirus software servers, applications, you name it.
Got it.
And then they correlate all this data and look for patterns that might indicate a security incident.
So it's kind of like a big data analytics platform for security.
Exactly. And SIEM systems are really powerful because they can give you a holistic view of your security posture.
Right. They can see the whole picture.
Exactly. And they can help you to identify threats that you might not otherwise notice.
So they can connect the dots.
Exactly. They can help you to see the forest for the trees.
Got it. Okay, so SIEM is really important for real-time monitoring.
It's a cornerstone of a zero-trust architecture.
Okay, what else?
Well, another important technology is User and Entity Behavior Analytics, or UABA.
Okay, UAB.
Yeah, so UEBA systems are specifically designed to detect threats that are based on user behavior.
Okay, so instead of looking for malware or network intrusions, they're looking for people who are acting suspiciously.
Exactly. So UEBA systems build a baseline of normal behavior for users,
Okay.
and then they look for deviations from that baseline.
Got it. So if I suddenly start accessing files that I've never accessed before,
Right.
or if I start logging in at strange hours,
Exactly.
or if I start sending large amounts of data outside the organization.
Right. All of those things would be red flags.
Right, because they're not typical for me.
Exactly. And UEB systems can detect those anomalies and alert the security team.
So they can investigate further.
Exactly.
Okay, so UEBA is a really powerful tool for detecting insider threats.
It is. And it's also useful for detecting compromised accounts.
Right, because if an attacker gains access to my account, they're probably going to start doing things that are not typical for me.
Exactly. They're going to leave a trail of breadcrumbs.
And UEBA is going to pick up on those breadcrumbs.
Exactly. It's going to see those anomalies and raise the alarm.
Got it. Okay, so UEBA is a really important part of adaptive security.
It is, and it's becoming increasingly popular as organizations realize the importance of behavioral analytics.
Okay, what else?
Well, another interesting technology that they mentioned in the article is deception technology.
Okay, deception technology, what's that?
So this is basically about setting traps for attackers.
Okay, so it's kind of like playing a game of cat and mouse,
Exactly. You're trying to lure the attacker into a controlled environment.
where you can watch them.
Exactly. And where you can learn more about their tactics.
Got it.
So deception technology can involve a variety of techniques.
Okay,
You might create fake users or fake systems.
okay,
You might plant fake data,
got it.
or you might even create entire fake networks.
Wow, so it's kind of like creating a virtual honeypot.
Exactly. That's a great way to put it.
Okay, so if an attacker stumbles into one of these traps,
Really?
what happens?
Well, you could do a few things. You can alert the security team. You could start recording the attacker's activity,
Got it.
or you can even try to contain the attacker
Okay.
and prevent them from doing any real damage.
So it's kind of like a way to turn the tables on the attackers.
Exactly. You're using their own curiosity against them.
Got it. Okay, so deception technology is a really interesting approach to security.
It is.
Yeah.
And it can be very effective if it's done right.
Okay, so we've talked about SIME-UEBA and deception technology.
Right.
What other technologies are important for real-time monitoring and adaptive security?
Well, another important one is security orchestration, automation and response, or SOAR.
Okay, BSOR.
Yeah, so SOAR platforms are basically designed to automate security tasks
Okay.
and to help security teams respond more quickly to incidents.
So it's kind of like having a robot security analyst.
Exactly. It can take over a lot of the tedious and repetitive tasks that security analysts have to do.
Okay, like what kind of tasks?
Well, it could be things like collecting data from different sources,
Okay.
correlating that data,
Got it.
analyzing threats,
Okay.
and even taking actions to remediate threats.
So it's kind of like a force multiplier for security teams.
Exactly. It can help them to be more efficient and effective.
Got it. Okay, so SR is a really important tool for automating security operations.
It is, and it's becoming increasingly popular as organizations realize the benefits of automation.
Okay, so we've talked about SIEM, UEBA deception technology, and SOAR.
Right?
Those are all really important technologies for real-time monitoring and adaptive security.
Exactly. And they all play a key role in a zero-trust architecture.
Okay, so we've covered the 4 key architectural components of